The harsh winter wind carried Bethany James's sobs as she clutched her newborn daughter to her chest, the tiny bundle's cries barely audible against the howling gale that swept across the Montana prairie. It was 1878, and in the span of a single day, she had lost everything: her home, her reputation, and any semblance of security she had once known. "Hush now, little one," Bethany whispered, tears freezing against her cheeks as she trudged through the snow. Her thin shawl offered little protection against the biting cold, but she wrapped it tighter around her baby, sacrificing her own comfort. "Mama's going to find us somewhere warm." The town of Concordia, Montana, lay behind her, its lights growing dimmer with each painful step she took. She'd been living there for barely a year, working as a schoolteacher after arriving from Boston with dreams of independence. Now those dreams were shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of survival. Reverend Thomas and the town council had made their decisions swiftly once her condition became impossible to hide. An unwed mother could not teach the town's children she was a moral failing personified, they'd said. It mattered little that the man responsible had abandoned her, fleeing back east when she'd told him about the baby. Her dismissal had been immediate, her eviction from the teacher's boarding house just as swift. "Where are we going to go?" she whispered to her daughter, Clara, born just 3 days earlier. The baby's face was pinched with cold despite Bethany's efforts to shield her. Panic rose in her chest as she realized the terrible truth: they might not survive the night. A mile outside of town stood an abandoned trapper's cabin she'd passed during her walks in better days. It was their only hope now. Bethany forced her exhausted legs forward, each step more difficult than the last. The weight of her child, light as she was, felt immense against her weakened body. The cabin appeared like a mirage through the swirling snow, a dark, squat silhouette against the white landscape. Bethany nearly wept with relief as she staggered toward it. The door hung precariously on rusted hinges, creaking as she pushed it open. Inside was little warmer than outside, but at least the wind was blocked. The single room was bare except for a broken table, a rickety chair, and the stone fireplace that dominated one wall. "We'll be safe here," she promised her daughter, though she knew it was a lie. Without food, without heat, without milk for her baby, they were merely delaying the inevitable. The birth had been difficult, and her body had not responded as it should. The midwife had warned her that she might not be able to nurse, and the prediction had proven true. She had tried everything, but no milk came. For 2 precious days at the boarding house, she had purchased cow's milk from a nearby farm, but now she had no money and no means to feed her child. The terrible knowledge sat like ice in her stomach, harder and colder than the floor beneath her as she sank down, cradling Clara close. "Someone will come," she whispered, another lie. No one would come. No one knew where they were, and no one in Concordia cared. She was an outcast, a sinner in their eyes. Miles away, Garrett Nash tightened his scarf against the bitter cold as he guided his horse along the snow-covered trail. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy was returning to the Diamond Creek Ranch after delivering a message to a neighboring property when the storm hit. He should have stayed at the Parker place until it passed, but something, perhaps stubbornness, perhaps instinct, had urged him to start for home. Now he was regretting that decision as the wind picked up, driving icy particles against his face. His hoarse thunder snorted in protest, steam billowing from his nostrils. "Just a bit further, boy," Garrett encouraged, though he knew they were still miles from the ranch. He would need to find shelter soon. As if in answer to his thoughts, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a dark figure struggling through the snow some distance away. At first he thought it might be a deer or perhaps a trick of the fading light, but as he drew closer, he recognized the outline of a person. "Hello there," he called, but his voice was lost in the wind. He urged thunder forward, closing the distance quickly. It was a woman, he realized with surprise, clutching something to her chest as she fought against the storm. Her progress was painfully slow, her steps unsteady. "Miss," he called again, louder this time. "Miss, are you all right?" The woman turned, revealing a pale face framed by dark hair escaping from beneath a worn bonnet. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, a mixture of fear and desperate hope crossing her features. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please help us." Only then did Garrett notice the bundle in her arms, a baby, its tiny face red with cold and crying. He dismounted immediately, leading Thunder closer. "What in God's name are you doing out here in this weather?" he asked, concern overriding propriety. "Especially with a little one." "We have nowhere else to go," she replied, swaying slightly on her feet. "They made us leave town." Garrett didn't need to ask who they were. He'd lived in the territory long enough to know how unforgiving small towns could be to those who broke their moral codes. His jaw tightened with anger, but he kept his voice gentle. "Where are you headed?" "There's a cabin," she said, pointing vaguely ahead. "Just there, I thought we might." Her voice trailed off as she stumbled. Garrett caught her arm, steadying her. "I know the place," he said. "Old Mackenzie's hunting cabin. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. Come on, I'll help you get there." He helped her mount Thunder, placing the baby carefully in her arms before leading the horse through the deepening snow. The cabin soon appeared, looking more derelict than he remembered. "It's been abandoned for years," he said as he pushed the door open, "but the roof seems sound enough." Inside, he quickly assessed the situation. The fireplace was intact, though filled with debris, and a pile of old firewood was stacked in one corner, likely left by hunters who occasionally used the place. "Let me get a fire going," he said, removing his gloves and setting to work clearing the hearth. The woman sank onto the floor, still holding her baby close. Now that they were out of the wind, he could hear the infant's cries more clearly, a hungry, desperate sound that cut through him. "How old is your baby?" he asked, striking a match to the kindling he'd arranged. 3 days, she replied, her voice weak. "She was born just before. She didn't finish, but she didn't need to." Garrett understood the situation well enough, cast out immediately after childbirth with nowhere to go and no means to care for her child. "What's your name, miss?" he asked as the fire caught, sending a welcome glow across the cabin. "Bethany James," she replied. "And this is Clara." "Garrett Nash," he said with a slight nod. "I work at Diamond Creek Ranch about 7 miles west of here." The baby's cries grew more insistent, a sound of pure need that made Bethany's face contort with anguish. "She's hungry," she explained, tears welling in her eyes. I can't feed her. My milk never came in. In town, I had cow's milk, but now." Her voice broke, and Garrett felt a surge of protectiveness unlike anything he'd experienced before. He'd encountered plenty of hardship in his 30 years, had seen men die in the war, had weathered droughts and blizzards, and the 1,000 natural shocks that came with life in the West. But something about this woman and her helpless child struck him to his core. "I'll go back to town," he said firmly. "Get milk and whatever else you need." Bethany's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You would do that? But the storm I've ridden through worse," he assured her, though in truth, the weather was deteriorating rapidly. "Thunder knows the way and we can follow our tracks back." "Why would you help us?" she asked, suspicion mingling with desperate hope in her voice. "You don't even know me." Garrett hesitated, unsure himself why he felt so compelled to aid this stranger. Perhaps it was the memory of his own mother, widowed young and struggling to raise him alone. Perhaps it was simply human decency, something that seemed in short supply in Concordia. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because no one should be left to die in the cold, especially not a mother and her baby." He moved to the door, pausing to add more wood to the fire. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Keep the fire going and stay warm." Bethany's gratitude was palpable, though she seemed too exhausted for many words. "Thank you," she whispered. "We'll be here." The journey back to Concordia was treacherous. Snow had covered their tracks and the wind had picked up, driving icy particles against Garrett's face with stinging force. Thunder pressed forward valiantly, but progress was painfully slow. By the time the lights of town appeared, Garrett was half frozen, his thoughts occupied by the woman and child waiting in the cabin. Would they survive if he couldn't make it back? The baby's cries echoed in his mind, fueling his determination. Concordia was quiet, most residents sheltering from the storm. Garrett headed straight for the general store, relieved to see a light still burning inside. He dismounted stiffly, tethering Thunder to the hitching post before pounding on the door. After a moment, Walter Simmons, the storekeeper, appeared, his expression wary until he recognized Garrett. "Nash, what in tarnation are you doing out in this weather?" he asked, opening the door. "Need supplies," Garrett said, stamping snow from his boots as he entered. "Milk mainly, and whatever else a woman with a newborn might need." Walter's eyebrows rose. "A woman and a newborn? You mean that school teacher?" His face darkened. "The one that got herself in trouble." Garrett's jaw tightened. "I mean a mother and her baby who are freezing and starving because this town threw them out." Walter had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was the council's decision, and Reverend Thomas— "I don't care whose decision it was," Garrett interrupted. "Right now I need milk and supplies, and I'm willing to pay good money for them." The storekeeper hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I've got condensed milk that'll do in a pinch, some cloth for diapers too. Anything else?" "Food," Garrett said. "Something easy to prepare. And matches, extra blankets if you've got them." As Walter gathered the items, the door opened again, admitting Dr. Samuel Peterson, the town's physician. The older man stamped snow from his boots, looking surprised to see Garrett. "Nash, thought you'd be holed up at Diamond Creek in this weather." "Got caught in the storm," Garrett explained briefly. "Found Miss James and her baby stranded outside town." The doctor's expression shifted, concern replacing surprise. "Bethany James, good Lord, I heard the council had asked her to leave, but in this weather." He shook his head. "Where is she now?" "Mackenzie's old cabin, about a mile east," Garrett replied. "The baby's hungry. Miss James says she can't nurse." Dr. Peterson nodded grimly. "I attended the birth, difficult delivery, and the milk never came in. I told Reverend Thomas she needed time to recover, but he wouldn't listen." He hesitated, then reached for his medical bag. "I'd better come with you." Garrett felt a surge of relief. "Thank you, Doc. She looked pretty worn out." Walter finished packaging the supplies, accepting Garrett's payment with a muttered, Tell her I'm sorry about what happened." The ride back to the cabin was marginally easier with the doctor alongside him, though the snow continued to fall heavily. Garrett's thoughts kept returning to Bethany and Clara, wondering if the fire had held, if they were still warm, still alive. The cabin was dark from the outside, and for a terrible moment, Garrett feared the worst. But when he pushed open the door, the glow of the fire revealed Bethany sitting exactly where he'd left her, Clara still clutched to her chest. Both were alive, though the baby's cries had weakened to pitiful whimpers. "Miss James," Dr. Peterson said, hurrying forward. "Let me see the child." Bethany looked up, confusion and relief washing over her face. "Dr. Peterson, how Mr. Nash found me in town," the doctor explained, gently taking the baby. "Let's get this little one fed first, and then I'll examine you both." Garrett busied himself preparing the condensed milk according to Walter's instructions, diluting it with water he melted from snow. The doctor guided Bethany in feeding Clara with a clean cloth dipped in the milk mixture. The change in the baby was immediate. Her cries ceased as she eagerly sucked the life-giving nourishment from the cloth, her tiny hands curling and uncurling in contentment. "That's it," Dr. Peterson encouraged. "She's got a healthy appetite, which is a good sign." Bethany's tears fell freely now, but they were tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, looking from the doctor to Garrett. "Both of you. I thought we were going to die out here." "Not while I have anything to say about it," Garrett said firmly, stoking the fire higher. He unpacked the rest of the supplies while the doctor examined both mother and child. Clara, despite her ordeal, seemed to be doing well, but Bethany was exhausted, feverish, and showing signs of infection from the birth. "You need rest and proper care," Dr. Peterson said, administering medicine from his bag. "This should help with the infection, but you shouldn't be out here in this cabin." I have nowhere else to go, Bethany replied quietly. The doctor glanced at Garrett, a silent question in his eyes. She can come to Diamond Creek, Garrett said without hesitation. My boss, Mr. Harrington, is a fair man. He wouldn't turn away someone in need, especially not with a baby. I couldn't impose, Bethany began, but her protest was weak. It's not imposing, Garrett assured her. We've got space in the main house and Mrs. Harrington would welcome the company, especially a baby. She loves children. Dr. Peterson nodded approvingly. That's the best solution, Miss James. You need proper shelter and care at least until you're fully recovered. Bethany looked at her daughter, now sleeping peacefully after her meal, then back at Garrett. Why are you helping us? She asked again, her voice small. Garrett thought about it for a moment, then answered honestly. Because it's what my mother raised me to do. She was left alone with me when my pa died in the war. Said there were good people who helped us through, and I should do the same when I saw someone in need. He paused. Besides, no one deserves to be treated the way Concordia treated you. The storm raged on through the night, forcing them to remain in the cabin until morning. Dr. Peterson took the first watch, insisting that Garrett get some rest. Bethany and Clara slept near the fire, wrapped in the blankets he had brought from town. In the small hours, Garrett took over, watching as the flames cast dancing shadows across Bethany's sleeping face. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the showy way of saloon girls or the practiced manner of society ladies, but with a quiet dignity that even her current circumstances couldn't diminish. When dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving a world transformed by snow. The sky was clear, the sun casting a golden glow across the white landscape. We should head for Diamond Creek while the weather holds, Garrett suggested as they shared a simple breakfast of jerky and hardtack. It's about 3 hours' ride from here, Dr. Peterson nodded. I'll head back to town and check on you in a few days, Miss James. Continue with the medicine I gave you and make sure to rest. Bethany thanked him, her color marginally better after a night's sleep and proper food. Clara had been fed twice more during the night, and while still tiny, seemed stronger already. The doctor departed after extracting a promise from Garrett to send word if Bethany's condition worsened. Then it was time for them to leave as well. I'll carry Clara, Garrett offered as Bethany struggled to wrap the baby securely. You'll need both hands to hold on. She hesitated only briefly before carefully transferring her daughter to his arms. Garrett had never held a baby before, and he was struck by how light she was, how perfectly she fit in the crook of his arm. Hello there, little miss, he said softly. Clara stared up at him with unfocused blue eyes, her tiny brow furrowing as if deep in thought. Bethany watched them, something unreadable passing across her face. She likes you, she said with surprise. Good judge of character, Garrett replied with a smile, helping Bethany onto Thunder's back before mounting behind her, holding Clara securely between them. The ride to Diamond Creek Ranch was slow but steady. Thunder picked his way carefully through the snow, seeming to understand the precious nature of his cargo. Bethany was quiet for most of the journey, occasionally asking questions about the ranch and the Harringtons. Mr. Harrington came out west about 15 years ago, Garrett explained. Built Diamond Creek from nothing into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Mrs. Harrington Emma is from back east originally. Philadelphia, I think. They've got no children of their own, which has been a sorrow to them. And you've worked for them long? Bethany asked. 6 years now, Garrett replied. Started as just another hand, worked my way up to foreman about 2 years back. You must be good at what you do. I work hard, he said simply. And I care about the ranch like it was my own. They crested a hill, and Diamond Creek spread out before them, a collection of well-maintained buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from several chimneys. Even in winter, there was activity in the yards, men moving between the barn and the corrals. It's beautiful, Bethany murmured. It's home, Garrett replied, feeling a surge of pride as he guided Thunder down the slope toward the ranch. Their arrival caused a stir. Ranch hands stopped their work to stare as Garrett rode in with a woman and baby. Mrs. Harrington emerged from the main house, a tall, elegant woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair. "Garrett," she called, hurrying toward them. "We were worried when you didn't return yesterday." "Who's this?" Garrett dismounted, helping Bethany down carefully before handing Clara back to her. "Mrs. Harrington, this is Miss Bethany James and her daughter, Clara. They were stranded in the storm. Miss James needs a place to stay while she recovers." Emma Harrington's eyes softened as she took in the exhausted young woman and her infant. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Bethany's arm. "My dear, you look half frozen. Come inside immediately. We'll get you both warm and settled." Bethany looked overwhelmed by the welcome. "I don't want to be a burden," she began. "Nonsense," Emma said firmly. "Any friend of Garrett's is welcome at Diamond Creek. Besides," she added, her gaze lingering on Clara, "it's been far too long since we've had a baby in this house." She ushered Bethany inside, calling for hot water and soup. Garrett handed Thunder off to one of the stable boys and followed, explaining the situation in more detail to Mrs. Harrington as they went. "Cast out in this weather with a newborn. What is Concordia thinking?" Emma exclaimed, outrage clear in her voice. "Well, you did right to bring them here, Garrett. They can stay as long as they need to." Mr. Harrington, a robust man with a thick gray beard, was equally welcoming when he returned from checking the cattle. "Any woman who can survive a Montana blizzard with a 3-day-old baby has my respect," he declared. "You're welcome here, Miss James." Bethany was settled in a comfortable guest room, Clara beside her in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer lined with soft blankets. The ranch cook, Mrs. Rollins, prepared special meals to help Bethany regain her strength, and Emma taught her how to feed Clara using a rubber nippled bottle she had ordered from St. Louis years ago, in anticipation of children who never came. Days passed, turning into weeks. February gave way to March, bringing slightly milder weather though snow still blanketed the land. Bethany's health improved steadily under Emma's attentive care. Clara thrived, gaining weight and growing more alert each day. Garrett found himself increasingly drawn to the guest room, finding excuses to check on mother and child. Something about Bethany's quiet strength and the way she devoted herself to Clara despite their circumstances touched him deeply. For her part, Bethany seemed to relax more each day, the haunted look gradually fading from her eyes. She began to help with light household tasks as she recovered, insisting she needed to earn her keep. "You're still recovering," Emma protested one afternoon, finding Bethany folding laundry. "There's plenty of time for work later." "I've never been one to sit idle," Bethany replied with a small smile. "Besides, it feels good to be useful again." Emma studied her thoughtfully. "You were a teacher in Concordia," Garrett mentioned. Bethany nodded, her expression clouding slightly. "For almost a year, I loved it. The children were wonderful." "We have no school here at Diamond Creek," Emma said. "Some of the ranch hands have children and they receive little formal education, perhaps when you're fully recovered." Hope flickered across Bethany's face. "You would allow me to teach, even knowing my situation?" "Your situation is that you're a capable young woman who's had some misfortune," Emma said firmly. "What happened in Concordia stays in Concordia as far as I'm concerned." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. Seeing you and Clara healthy and happy is repayment enough," Emma assured her, patting her hand. "And between us," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "I haven't seen Garrett so attentive to a guest before. He's been asking after you every day." Bethany blushed, looking away. "He saved our lives. I'll always be grateful to him." "I think it might be more than gratitude on his part," Emma said gently, "but there's time enough to see where that leads. For now, focus on getting strong again." One evening in mid-March, Garrett found Bethany sitting on the front porch, watching the sunset with Clara bundled warmly in her arms. The baby was awake, her eyes tracking the brilliant colors painting the sky. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, stopping at the bottom step. Please do, Bethany replied, shifting slightly to make room on the bench. Garrett sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. How are you feeling today? Better, she said. Stronger. Dr. Peterson says I'm healing well. The doctor had ridden out from Concordia several times to check on Bethany and Clara, bringing news that the town was divided over their treatment. Some, led by Reverend Thomas, maintained that moral standards had to be upheld. Others, particularly after hearing how Bethany had nearly died in the storm, questioned whether Christian charity had been forgotten. Good, Garrett said. And Clara's certainly growing. Bethany smiled, looking down at her daughter. She is. Mrs. Harrington says she'll need new clothes soon. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight gilded the snow-covered landscape. Mrs. Harrington mentioned you might start teaching the ranch children, Garrett said eventually. She suggested it, Bethany confirmed. If Mr. Harrington agrees, I'd love to. It would be a way to contribute to thank you all for taking us in. He'll agree, Garrett assured her. He respects education, says he wishes he'd had more of it himself. Bethany nodded, then hesitated before asking, Have you heard anything more from Concordia about whether we might be allowed back? Garrett's expression darkened. You're not thinking of going back there. I don't know, she admitted. It's just, I had a life there before. A position, a purpose. You have purpose here, Garrett said more forcefully than he'd intended. He softened his tone. The Harringtons want you to stay, and not just out of charity. They genuinely like having you and Clara here. And you? Bethany asked, her eyes meeting his directly for perhaps the first time since they'd met. Do you want us to stay? Garrett felt his heart rate quicken. Yes, he said simply. I do. A slight blush colored her cheeks as she looked away. Why? It was a fair question, but one he found difficult to answer. How could he explain the connection he felt to her, the protective instinct that had evolved into something deeper over the weeks of watching her fight to recover, to create a life for herself and Clara? Because you belong here, he said finally. Because I've never met anyone as brave as you, riding out that storm, refusing to give up even when it seemed hopeless. Because, he paused, gathering his courage. Because I find myself thinking about you when I should be concentrating on work. Because seeing you and Clara first thing in the morning makes the day better. Bethany's eyes widened at his confession. Garrett, I'm not what you think. I made mistakes. Clara's father, I don't care about the past, he interrupted gently. Everyone has a history. What matters is who you are now and what might be in the future. She looked down at Clara, who had fallen asleep in her arms. My future is her. Everything I do, every decision I make has to be for her welfare. I understand that, Garrett said, and I respect it. I'm not asking for anything, Bethany. I just wanted you to know that there are people here who care about you both, who want you to stay. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than I can say. As spring slowly awakened the land, Bethany began teaching half a dozen ranch children in a corner of the main house dining room. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 12, were eager students, and Bethany blossomed in her role as their teacher. Clara grew stronger each day, her personality emerging a curious, determined baby who rarely cried but watched the world with solemn blue eyes. She became the darling of the ranch, passed from Mrs. Harrington to Mrs. Rollins to the ranch hands' wives, all eager to hold and coo over her. Garrett maintained a respectful distance, careful not to press Bethany after their conversation on the porch. But he found reasons to be near the makeshift schoolroom, to join her for meals, to bring her wildflowers that emerged from the melting snow. As April turned the landscape green, Dr. Peterson brought news from Concordia. Reverend Thomas had suffered a stroke and retired from his position. The new minister, a younger man named Reverend Wilson, had publicly questioned the handling of Bethany's situation. He says the town owes you an apology, the doctor reported. That casting out a woman and child flies in the face of true Christian teaching. An apology won't change what happened, Bethany said, bouncing Clara on her knee. The baby had recently discovered laughter, and the sound of her giggles regularly filled the house. "No, but it might clear the way for you to return if you wished," Dr. Peterson suggested. "The school position remains unfilled. The town council has authorized me to inquire whether you might consider coming back." Garrett, who had been sitting quietly nearby, felt his stomach tighten at the thought of Bethany leaving Diamond Creek. He looked down, unwilling to let her see his reaction. Bethany was quiet for a long moment. "Please thank the council for their consideration," she said finally. "But I believe Clara and I have found our place here. The Harringtons have been more than generous, and the children here need education just as much as those in town." Relief washed over Garrett, though he tried not to show it. Dr. Peterson nodded, seeming unsurprised by her answer. "I thought you might say that," the doctor said with a smile. "Can't say I blame you. Diamond Creek seems to agree with you both." After the doctor left, Garrett found Bethany in the garden, watching as Clara practiced sitting up on a blanket spread over the new grass. "Did you mean what you told Dr. Peterson?" he asked. "About staying," Bethany nodded, her gaze still on Clara. "Yes, this place, these people, you've all become home to us. I can't imagine leaving now." Garrett's heart soared at her words. "I'm glad," he said simply. She turned to face him. "When you found us that night, I thought you were just being kind, helping strangers in need. I never imagined." "Neither did I," he admitted, "but sometimes life takes unexpected turns." "Like a blizzard in February," she said with a small smile, "exactly like that." Clara toppled over from her sitting position, and Garrett instinctively moved to help, but Bethany shook her head. "Watch," she said. The baby pushed herself up with determined little arms, her face screwed up in concentration as she maneuvered back into a sitting position. When she succeeded, she looked up at them with a triumphant grin. "She's as stubborn as her mother," Garrett observed, smiling. "I prefer to call it determined," Bethany corrected with a laugh. As spring gave way to summer, life settled into a pleasant routine. Bethany's teaching expanded to include several adults from the ranch who wanted to improve their reading and writing. Clara learned to crawl, then pull herself up on furniture, exploring the world with boundless enthusiasm. Garrett and Bethany's friendship deepened, evolving gradually into something more. Their first kiss came on a warm June evening as fireflies danced over the meadow and the scent of wildflowers filled the air. "I've wanted to do that for months," Garrett confessed afterward, his hand gently cradling her cheek. "What took you so long?" Bethany teased, her eyes bright with happiness. "Respect," he replied seriously. "You'd been through so much, I wanted to give you time." She leaned into his touch. "You're a good man, Garrett Nash." "I try to be," he said. "Especially for you and Clara." Summer brought cattle drives and busy days for Garrett, but he always found time for Bethany and Clara. The baby's first birthday approached, a milestone that prompted reflection on how far they had come since that desperate night in the snow. "I want to ask you something," Garrett said one evening as they walked along the creek that gave the ranch its name. Clara was back at the house with Mrs. Harrington, who had eagerly volunteered to watch her. "That sounds serious," Bethany remarked, noting his solemn expression. Garrett stopped, taking both her hands in his. "It is serious. I love you, Bethany. I love Clara too, as if she were my own. I want us to be a family officially." Bethany's eyes widened. "Garrett, are you asking you to marry me?" "Yes, I am." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "I know it hasn't been that long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me, Bethany? Will you let me be a father to Clara?" Tears filled Bethany's eyes. "People will talk," she said softly. "They'll say you're taking on another man's child, that I'm let them talk," Garrett interrupted firmly. "What matters is us, you, me, and Clara. We know the truth of who we are, and that's enough." A smile broke through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Garrett stood, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of happiness. When they finally separated, both breathless, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. "It was my mother's," he explained, slipping it onto her finger. "She always said it should go to the woman I loved more than life itself." That's you, Bethany. The wedding took place in August, a simple ceremony performed by Reverend Wilson from Concordia. The Harringtons insisted on hosting at the ranch, transforming the yard into a celebration space with flowers, ribbons, and tables laden with food. Clara, now walking with determined if wobbly steps, served as flower girl, carried down the aisle by Emma Harrington before being set down to toddle the last few feet to her mother. Dressed in a tiny white dress that Emma had sewn, she stole hearts with her bright smile and curious eyes. Bethany wore a gown of pale blue silk, a gift from Emma, who had ordered it specially from Denver. Garrett, in his best suit, watched her approach with wonder in his eyes, scarcely able to believe his good fortune. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Wilson began, his voice carrying across the assembled guests' ranch hands and their families, a few townsfolk from Concordia who had supported Bethany, and of course, the Harringtons, beaming like proud parents. The vows were traditional but spoken with deep conviction. When Garrett promised to love and cherish Bethany in sickness and in health, her eyes misted with tears, remembering how he had found her at her lowest point and helped her rebuild her life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Garrett kissed his bride to the cheers of the gathering. Clara, not to be left out, tugged at his pant leg until he lifted her into his arms, including her in the embrace. "We're a family now," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "For always." The celebration continued into the evening with music and dancing under lantern light. As darkness fell, Mr. Harrington called for attention, raising his glass in a toast. "To Garrett and Bethany," he began. "Two people who have shown us all the meaning of courage, perseverance, and love." He paused, looking around the gathering. "And I have an announcement to make on this happy occasion. Garrett, as you know, Emma and I aren't getting any younger. We've been discussing the future of Diamond Creek, and we've decided it's time to take on a partner in the ranch." Murmurs swept through the crowd as Harrington continued. "Garrett, you've been more than a foreman these past years. You've been like a son to us. We'd like to offer you a partnership in Diamond Creek with the understanding that one day the ranch will be yours entirely." Stunned silence followed the announcement. Garrett stood frozen, Bethany's hand tight in his. "Sir, I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "Say yes, you fool," Harrington laughed. "You've earned it. Besides, where else would we find someone who cares about this place the way you do?" Garrett looked at Bethany, who nodded encouragingly, tears of joy in her eyes. "Yes," he said firmly. "Yes, and thank you, we'll make you proud." Another cheer went up from the assembled guests. Clara, who had been dozing in Emma's arms, woke at the noise and immediately reached for her mother. Bethany took her, and Garrett wrapped his arms around them both, his family, his future. Later that night, after the celebration had wound down and the guests departed, Garrett and Bethany stood on the porch of the small house that was now theirs, a wedding gift from the Harringtons. Clara slept peacefully inside, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "Are you happy?" Garrett asked, his arm around Bethany's waist as they gazed at the stars. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into him. "When you found us that night, I was certain my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. I thank God every day that I decided to ride through that storm," Garrett said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That I saw you in the snow, that I was able to help." "You did more than help," Bethany said softly. "You saved us, and not just that night, but every day since. You gave us a home, a family, a future. You gave me those things too," he told her. "I was just existing before, working hard, doing my job, but not really living. Now I have something to live for, someone to come home to every night." Bethany turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you, Garrett Nash, with all my heart." "And I love you, Bethany Nash," he replied, savoring the sound of her new name. "You and Clara are my whole world." 5 years later, Diamond Creek Ranch had prospered under Garrett's partnership with the Harringtons. The herd had grown, new land had been acquired, and the ranch's reputation for quality cattle spread throughout the territory. Bethany's school had expanded into a proper building, constructed by the ranch hands and equipped with books, slates, and maps ordered from back east. She taught children and adults alike, bringing education to a corner of Montana that had previously lacked such opportunities. Clara, now 6, was her mother's eager assistant, already showing a gift for teaching others. She had been joined by 2 brothers, 4-year-old Samuel and 2-year-old William, both bearing their father's dark hair and steady gaze. On a crisp October afternoon, Bethany stood in the doorway of their home, watching as Garrett taught Clara to ride her own pony, a birthday gift he had surprised her with the previous week. Samuel sat in front of his father on Garrett's horse, while William napped inside. "Keep your heels down, Clara," Garrett instructed patiently. "That's it. You're a natural, just like your mother." Clara beamed at the praise, her face a mirror of Bethany's in miniature, though her eyes were her own, a unique shade of green that sometimes appeared blue in certain light. "Mama, look," she called, guiding the pony in a careful circle. "I'm doing it." "I see you, sweetheart," Bethany called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Garrett caught Bethany's eye over Clara's head, his smile filled with pride and love. In that moment, the memory of that desperate night in the snowstorm seemed impossibly distant, like something from another lifetime. Yet Bethany knew she would never forget it, the fear, the desperation, but also the moment when hope arrived in the form of a kind-hearted cowboy who rode miles to bring milk for her starving baby. The cowboy who became her husband, Clara's father, the center of their world. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Garrett led Clara's pony back toward the house. Samuel had fallen asleep against his chest, and he carried the boy carefully as he dismounted. "I think that's enough riding lessons for today," he said, helping Clara down from her pony. "You did very well, little one." "Can we go again tomorrow?" Clara asked eagerly. "If the weather holds," Garrett promised, handing the sleeping Samuel to Bethany before leading the horses toward the barn. "Come help me with supper, Clara," Bethany suggested. "We'll make your father's favorite stew." As they worked in the kitchen, Clara chattering about her riding lesson and Samuel now awake and playing with wooden blocks on the floor, Bethany felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This life, this beautiful, ordinary life filled with love and purpose had seemed impossible that February night long ago. Garrett returned from the barn, William in his arms. The toddler had woken from his nap and wandered out to find his father, a common occurrence that always made Bethany's heart swell with love for them both. "Something smells good," Garrett observed, setting William down to join his brother. "Clara's making your favorite," Bethany told him with a smile. "She measured all the ingredients herself." "Is that so?" Garrett ruffled Clara's hair affectionately. "Thank you, sweetheart. Papa, Mr. Harrington says I can help with the spring calves next year," Clara informed him importantly. "He says I have a good eye for animals." "You certainly do," Garrett agreed. "You'll make a fine rancher someday if that's what you want." "I want to be a teacher like Mama and a rancher like you," Clara declared with the certainty only a 6-year-old could muster. "I can do both." "Yes, you can," Bethany assured her. "You can be anything you set your mind to." Garrett met Bethany's eyes over their daughter's head, his gaze filled with the same love that had been there from the beginning. 7 years had passed since that stormy night, yet each day seemed to deepen their connection, their understanding of one another. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Bethany and Garrett sat on the porch swing, a blanket draped over their laps against the autumn chill. The stars spread across the Montana sky in a dazzling display, the Milky Way a bright ribbon overhead. "The Harringtons are talking about retiring completely next year," Garrett said, his arm around Bethany's shoulders. "They want to travel, see some of the country before they're too old." "They deserve it," Bethany replied. "They've worked hard all their lives." "It means Diamond Creek will be entirely our responsibility," he continued. "A big undertaking." Bethany turned to look at him, noting the blend of excitement and trepidation in his expression. "We're ready," she said confidently. "You've been running most of the operation for years now, and the ranch has never been more prosperous." "It's not just the ranch," Garrett admitted. "It's everything providing for the family, making sure the children have what they need, supporting your school." "Garrett Nash," Bethany interrupted gently, "you've never failed us yet, and you never will. We'll face whatever comes together just as we always have," he smiled, drawing her closer. "How did I get so lucky?" "I ask myself the same question every day," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the occasional lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the distant howl of a coyote. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't found us that night?" Bethany asked suddenly, voicing a question that had haunted her occasionally over the years. Garrett's arm tightened around her. "I try not to," he said honestly. "The thought of you and Clara out there alone." He shook his head. "But I did find you, that's what matters. It's strange, isn't it? How the worst moment of my life led to the best years I could have imagined." "Life takes unexpected turns," Garrett said, echoing words he had spoken years ago in the Harringtons' garden. "Sometimes a storm brings you exactly where you're meant to be." Bethany nodded, thinking of the path that had brought them here, the heartbreak in Concordia, the desperate night in the snow, the slow blossoming of love at Diamond Creek. Every step, even the painful ones, had led to this life they had built together. "I wouldn't change a thing," she said softly. "Not even the hard parts. They brought me to you, to this home, to our family." Garrett kissed her then, a tender gesture that still held the power to make her heart race after all these years. When they separated, his eyes shone with emotion in the moonlight. "I rode miles to bring milk to a stranded mother and child," he said, "and found my heart, my purpose, my future. If that's not Providence, I don't know what is." Bethany smiled, thinking of their sleeping children, of the life they had created together, of the love that had transformed them both. "Providence indeed," she agreed. Or perhaps just the simplest truth of all that kindness, offered freely in a moment of need, can change everything. As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch, two souls bound by love and the remarkable journey that had brought them together. Behind them, their home stood warm and secure, sheltering their children. Before them stretched the vast Montana sky, filled with stars that had witnessed their story from the beginning, from desperate need to abiding love, from strangers to family, from a stormy winter night to the peaceful certainty of belonging, at last, to each other.